I had been in Iraq for 11 months, stationed with my unit in Mosul, a city where the air itself seemed to carry tension. The streets were narrow, twisted, and loud with the hum of generators, the distant echo of the call to prayer, and the sudden shouts that could mean anything from joy to warning. Out there was no such thing as routine. Every patrol was a coin toss, and every door we kicked open could be the one that ended everything. I still remember the way the heat would press down on you like a physical weight. In the desert, the sun doesn't just burn your skin, it bakes you from the inside. But in Mosul, the heat was mixed with the smell of dust, diesel, and smoke from fires that never seemed to die. You'd breathe it in until it coated your throat. Even now, back home, I swear I can still taste it sometimes. We lost good men out there. Friends who laughed with me in the morning and were gone by nightfall. I learned to stop asking why and just focus on the mission. My mission was survival and getting back to my family. Lucas, my boy, 6 years old now. The last time I saw him, he was barely up to my waist, running around in the backyard with a plastic football, pretending to be a quarterback. I kept his photo tucked inside the inner pocket of my vest, close enough to my heart that I could feel it with every step. On days when the firefights were too close, when the radio chatter filled with codes no soldier wants to hear, I'd press my hand against that photo and remind myself there was a reason to keep moving forward. As the months dragged on, I counted the days until I could see him again. Not just counted, I marked them. I had a small calendar folded into my journal, and every night, no matter how exhausted I was, I drew an X through the date. It became my ritual, my anchor. When orders finally came down that my deployment was over, I didn't tell my wife the exact day I'd be home. I wanted it to be a surprise. In my head, I pictured the scene over and over. I'd walk through the front door. Lucas would see me, drop whatever toy he was holding and run into my arms. My wife would be there smiling through tears, her voice breaking as she said my name. That fantasy kept me warm on the coldest nights. The flight home felt endless. From Mosul to Kuwait, then to Germany, and finally back to the States. Every airport felt surreal. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the crowds too casual. I found myself scanning for threats even in the food court. My shoulders ached from carrying my gear, but I kept my posture straight. Old habits. By the time I reached my hometown, my heart was pounding. I took a taxi from the base instead of waiting for anyone to pick me up. I wanted the first look on their faces to be completely unprepared. The driver chatted about the weather, about gas prices, about the local high school football team, and I nodded politely, but my mind was already in my living room. When we pulled up to the house, I noticed the front lawn was freshly mowed. The flower beds looked tended. I smiled at the thought that my wife had been keeping things in order while I was away. I grabbed my duffel bag, thanked the driver, and walked up to the front door. My hands were actually trembling as I reached for the handle. The hinges creaked softly as I stepped inside. I expected to hear Lucas's laughter, maybe the sound of cartoons in the background. Instead, the house was quieter than I imagined, just the faint murmur of voices coming from the living room. I rounded the corner and froze. There, sitting comfortably on my couch, was a man I had never seen before. He had my son in his arms. Lucas, my Lucas, was resting his head on the man's shoulder, holding a toy truck in one hand, like nothing was wrong. For a second, my mind refused to process it. My instincts, honed in combat zones, told me to assess, identify, react. But my heart just cracked open. The man looked up at me, startled, but not guilty. My wife stepped into view from the kitchen, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The war I thought I'd left behind was standing right in front of me. The first thing I noticed was how natural he looked holding my son. That stung more than any bullet I'd ever felt graze my skin. His hand rested gently on Lucas's back, his thumb moving in small circles, like a gesture practiced 100 times. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of my duffel bag cutting into my fingers. My mouth was dry. I could hear my own heartbeat, a deep, steady drum in my ears, the same sound I'd heard crouched behind a wall in Mosul, waiting for the enemy to make a move. "Daddy?" Lucas's voice was soft, almost unsure. He blinked at me, his eyes wide, and in that instant, I knew. He recognized me, but I wasn't the center of his world anymore. Not the way I used to be. The stranger shifted uncomfortably, adjusting Lucas on his lap before setting him down gently. My boy ran toward me, wrapping his arms around my waist. I knelt down, hugging him tightly, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, strawberry the same as before, but my eyes never left the man on the couch. My wife broke the silence. "Mark, this is—" I raised a hand. "Don't." My voice came out low, calm, but it was the kind of calm that hides a storm. Combat teaches you that emotions can get you killed. You control your breathing, slow your heartbeat, and you think. But standing in my own living room, staring at a stranger who had been holding my son, that discipline felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I scanned him like I would any unknown in hostile territory, early 40s, good shape, dressed casually, but clean. No obvious signs of guilt, no defensive posture. That made it worse. Guilt, at least, would mean acknowledgement of wrongdoing. This man looked comfortable. Lucas tugged on my sleeve, asking if I brought him anything from my trip. I nodded, forcing a smile, telling him his gift was in my bag. He didn't notice the tension thickening the air. My wife's voice trembled as she said, "Mark, please, let me explain." But explanations weren't what I needed right now. Not yet. Not until I got my head straight. I carried my bag into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. That room used to smell faintly of her perfume. Now it smelled neutral, like hotel sheets. I set the bag down, unzipped it, and pulled out the folded uniform I hadn't worn since my last patrol. The fabric was stiff, faded in places where the sun had beaten it mercilessly. The patches were still there, my name, my flag, my unit insignia, like silent witnesses to every mile I'd walked in hostile soil. I held it for a moment, my hands running over the seams, feeling the weight of it. In Iraq, that uniform had been my shield, my identity, my purpose. Out there, I knew who I was. Here, right now, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Some men drink when they come back from war. Others try to forget. Me, I go back to what I know. And what I know is preparation. I opened my closet, moved past the civilian clothes, and hung the uniform on the door. Then I reached for the gear I'd kept on boots, belt, dog tags. I wasn't arming myself for combat overseas, but the part of me that had fought, that had survived, that had outlasted the worst, was coming back online. Because I realized something in that moment. You don't need a battlefield to be at war. Sometimes the war comes to you, and when it does, you have to decide if you're going to stand there and take it, or suit up and fight. The sound of muffled voices drifted through the wall. My wife and the man were talking in the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught the tone, low, urgent, like people plotting, like they had something to protect. My fists clenched. I laced up my boots, the familiar motion grounding me. Every loop of the lace, every pull tight, was a step away from the confusion and closer to clarity. I wasn't sure yet what kind of war I was about to fight. Legal, emotional, maybe even physical. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to lose my son without a fight. When I stepped out of that bedroom again, wearing that uniform, the air in the house changed. The man on the couch looked up, his expression shifting from calm to wary. My wife's eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd left Mosul, I felt ready. When I stepped out of the bedroom, the weight of my boots on the hardwood floor seemed to echo in the living room. My uniform wasn't just fabric, it was a statement. Out there in Mosul, it told the world I was a soldier. Here, in my own home, it told them I wasn't about to be ignored. The man's eyes narrowed, not in challenge, but in calculation. He shifted his posture, sitting up straighter, as if my presence in uniform made him reassess whatever comfortable role he thought he had here. My wife's face went pale. "Mark, you don't need to—" "I need to," I interrupted, my voice low but sharp. "Because the last time I wore this, I was protecting my family, and it looks like I have to do that again." Lucas stood in the corner, clutching his toy truck, eyes flicking between the three of us. I hated that he was seeing this, The battlefield was no place for a child, and yet here he was, caught in the middle of one. I turned my attention to the man. "Who are you?" I asked, my tone steady, but with enough edge to cut through any rehearsed answer. He hesitated just long enough to make me suspect the truth would hurt. "Name's David," he finally said. "A friend." "Friends don't hold my son like that," I shot back. My wife stepped forward. "Mark, please, you've been gone almost a year. Things have been complicated. He's been here for us helping. The word landed like a grenade. In Mosul, help came with a cost. Favors owed, debts collected, territory lost. Here it sounded no different. David looked me in the eye, and for a second I saw something there. Not fear, not guilt. Something worse. The quiet certainty of a man who believed he belonged here. I'd been in this position before, in a way, standing across from someone who didn't fear me, who thought they had the advantage. In Iraq, that's when you learn to read the terrain, look for weaknesses, plan your move. I glanced at Lucas. "Buddy, why don't you go to your room for a bit? I'll come get you when I'm done talking to Mom and her friend." He nodded slowly, sensing the tension, and shuffled down the hallway. When I heard his door close, I let the silence stretch. "I'm going to ask again," I said to my wife. "Who is he really?" Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "He's been helping with the bills, with Lucas. I didn't plan this, Mark. Didn't plan this, as if betrayal was a scheduling error. I'd spent nearly a year in a war zone, thinking about nothing but making it home alive. I'd kept my head down, followed orders, faced men with rifles aimed at my chest, all so I could walk through that front door and find the life I left intact. Instead, I walked into something that felt worse than enemy fire, because bullets kill the body. This was killing everything else. I stepped closer to David, not enough to be threatening in the legal sense, but enough to make sure he understood something. I wasn't a ghost passing through. I was here to reclaim my ground. "You've had your time here," I said. "It's over." He looked past me at my wife, then back at me. "That's not your decision anymore." That sentence, those 6 words, hit like a sniper's shot. I didn't react outwardly, but inside the gears started turning. In combat, you don't act out of rage, you act out of strategy. Rage gets you sloppy. Strategy wins wars. I realized this wasn't going to be settled in a shouting match. This was going to be a campaign. And just like in Mosul, the first step was gathering intel. I needed to know exactly what I was up against, legally, emotionally, financially. So I did what I'd done in Iraq when the situation got murky. I stepped back, but I didn't disengage. Without another word, I turned, walked to my room, and pulled open my desk drawer. Inside was a small, worn notebook, the kind I used overseas to jot down patrol routes, mission details, anything that might be useful later. This time it was going to hold a different kind of battle plan. I sat down, wrote their names at the top of the page, my wife's, David's, and underneath a single sentence. "The war starts here. War changes how you walk through a house. You stop drifting and start clearing." That night I moved room to room like I was tracing a perimeter. First stop was Lucas. He was asleep on his side, toy truck tucked under his chin, hair stuck to his forehead. I brushed it back with 2 fingers and felt a quiet ache settle in my ribs. The battlefield is loud. The damage it leaves is not. In the kitchen, the intel was everywhere. A new magnet from a weekend festival I didn't attend. A chore chart in handwriting I didn't recognize. Rounded letters. A slanted D by Pick Up Lucas. The wall calendar had check marks on nights that used to be mine. Penciled notes, practice, dentist, school night, written by someone who had been here long enough to think he belonged. That's how you lose ground in peacetime, one small square at a time while you're looking the other way. I brewed coffee I didn't need, sat at the table in uniform, and opened my old green notebook. In Mosul, I used it for patrol routes, call signs, a list of streets that turned bad in the afternoon. I titled a fresh page in block letters, Operation Homefront. Then I wrote 5 objectives, clean and simple. Protect Lucas. Secure legal footing. Establish facts and timelines. Control the narrative. Keep my head. Phase 1. Intel. I took photos of the calendar and chart. I checked mail with my name on it, then bank and utility statements. Dates changed, names added. A streaming service I didn't subscribe to. A hardware store charge for a weekend I was 6,000 miles away. None of it was a smoking gun. Together it was a map. At 0200 I called Santos. We don't waste introductions. Home, I said. How bad? New AO, unknowns inside the wire. He exhaled once. Don't go loud, document, lawyer up, sleep if you can. I slept 80 minutes with my boots on, same as we did before a convoy. At dawn I showered, shaved, and changed into jeans and a clean t-shirt. I hung the uniform on the closet door where I could see it. A reminder, not a threat. I made pancakes with a crooked smiley face because that's how Lucas likes them. He told me about a teacher with loud socks and a soccer coach everyone called Coach D. The slanted D again. I kept my jaw loose and nodded like it was an ordinary detail in an ordinary life. After drop-off, I drove to a law office, a VSO at the VA had circled on a brochure. Former JAG, grey at the temples, steady eyes. He read my notes, asked tight questions, and never once pretended this was simple. You're angry, he said. I'm controlled. Good. Courts like controlled. He slid a legal pad between us and spoke like he was issuing an op order. Petition to establish a temporary parenting plan. Motion to prevent relocation without consent. Request limiting third-party contact pending hearing. Documentation of deployment and return. Paper, he said, tapping the pad, is the loudest weapon in this building. We filed by close of business. Phase 2. Allies. I texted my sister because she shows up without adding gasoline. I called my father and asked for the version of him who taught me to tie a tie, not the one who puts his fist through drywall. He arrived that afternoon with a toolbox and fixed the pantry hinge that had squeaked since before I left. Dad say, I'm here, with repairs. I met Lucas's school counselor and used words that matter in rooms like hers: stability, routine, consistency. I didn't use the word affair. I asked how Lucas had been on hard days. She said, he misses you. Sometimes he worries you won't come home again. I wrote that down. Not for court, for the nights when anger tries to outrun purpose. That evening my wife sat at the table with her hands around a mug gone cold. David wasn't there. I placed the notebook between us like a white flag and a line in the sand. I'm not here to shout, I said. I'm here to set terms that keep Lucas whole. It wasn't planned, she whispered. I was alone. He helped. It got complicated. Complicated is for taxes, I said. Lucas needs one home base, predictable exchanges and no new coaches deciding our routines. She stared at the mug as if it could answer for her. I didn't think you were coming back the same. I didn't, I said. Different isn't gone. At 2000 there was a knock. David. He stepped in, eyes grazing the uniform on the hanger before finding mine. He kept his chin level, like a man who's survived enough to think he's unshakable. I'm not here to make a scene, he said. I'm here to pick up— You're not picking up anything, I answered, calm enough to be quoted. A petition's filed. Until a judge says otherwise, you don't put your hands on my son. He smirked. You think a costume and paperwork make you the hero in this? I don't need to be the hero, I said. I need to be the father. Silence did the rest. He looked to my wife for rescue. She didn't move. He left with a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. From then on I moved like I was on a long patrol. Precise, boring, relentless. I showed up early, left on time, and texted my wife bullet point summaries after every day with Lucas. No commentary, just facts. Dinner eaten, pages read, lights out. I ran at dawn, a neighborhood loop that steadied my head, left on Maple, right on 3rd, past the church where the flag cracks in the wind. Sweat is the cleanest language I speak. At the VA, I sat across from a therapist who didn't flinch when I said the quiet part. I'm afraid I'll make one decision my son will remember for the wrong reason. She taught me a breathing pattern to do at stoplights. A lot of fathers fight with volume, she said. You're fighting with presence, that's the kind he keeps. At soccer pickup, I saw a clipboard labeled Coach Dave, the handwriting I already knew. He wasn't there, but the pen had been. I stepped aside and called my lawyer. "Put it in writing," he said. "Paper moves clipboards." By evening, the school and league had a letter on file clarifying boundaries and authorized contacts. Nights were for Lego forts and plastic soldiers. Lucas handed me one missing an arm. "This one's you," he said, squinting with 6-year-old seriousness. "You came back, but different." "I did," I said, kneeling to his level. "Different means I learned a lot about protecting people I love." "From bad guys?" "From bad choices," I said. "Even mine." The hearing landed on a Thursday. I ironed a shirt, slid my dog tags into a drawer, and placed the green notebook in my bag. You don't wear your war into court. You carry it inside and let the judge meet the father. My father picked me up at 07:30. He didn't give advice. He checked his mirrors and said, "Proud of you, son," in the voice men say for the few things that matter. On the courthouse steps, my lawyer handed me a folder and a nod. "Remember," he said, "calm is strategy." I looked up at the flag and thought about the first oath I ever swore at 19, not knowing the cost. Oaths are for mornings like this. Inside, the hallway hummed with low voices and shoe squeaks. My wife stood by a bench, eyes rimmed red. David kept his distance, jaw tight. I stopped at a respectful line. "This isn't a firefight," I told her quietly. "It's logistics." She nodded, a small, tired yes that said she was done being the battlefield too. When the clerk opened the door and called our case, my pulse settled into that slow, steady cadence my body saves for moments that define everything after. I squared my shoulders, not like a soldier about to breach, but like a father about to speak, and stepped through the door. The war wasn't out there anymore. It was here, in rooms with clocks and rules and pens. I had prepared for this. For him, I was ready to fight the only way that would keep us whole. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and old carpet, the scent of 100 battles fought without gunfire. I sat at the table next to my lawyer, spine straight, hands folded, breathing slow. Across the aisle, David sat behind my wife, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that didn't waste time. She reviewed the file in silence for a moment, flipping through the petition, the statements, the photographs of calendars and chore charts. My lawyer had organized everything like an op plan: dates, evidence, timelines, tight, clear, and impossible to ignore. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I told her about my deployment to Mosul, the months away, the daily thought of my son. I told her I came home to find another man, holding him in my living room. I didn't throw accusations. I laid out facts. Then I said the one sentence that mattered most. My son needs stability, and I will fight to give it to him. David spoke next. He tried to sound calm, but his words wavered. He painted himself as a friend to the family, someone who stepped in when I was gone. The judge listened, expression unreadable. My wife admitted to a complicated situation, but avoided details. The judge leaned forward, lacing her fingers. This court will not dissect personal relationships beyond what impacts the child's welfare, she said. What matters here is the environment and consistency in the child's life. Then she read the ruling. Temporary primary custody granted to me, joint legal custody maintained, and explicit restrictions placed on any unrelated adult having unsupervised contact with Lucas, including David. All exchanges to be done in public places. No overnight stays away from the primary residence without written consent. David's jaw tightened. My wife's eyes welled with tears. I didn't celebrate. In war, you don't cheer after taking ground. You secure it. Outside, the air felt sharper. My father clapped a hand on my shoulder. My lawyer said, "You did it right. No explosions, no collateral damage." I picked Lucas up from school that afternoon. He saw me waiting and broke into a run, his backpack bouncing. When he crashed into my arms, I lifted him off the ground, feeling his weight settle against me, heavier than before, but in a way that felt like home. We drove to the park. He told me about math tests and how he scored a goal in practice last week. I didn't mention court or rulings or David. Kids don't need the full briefing, they need the results. That night, after dinner and homework, we built a Lego fort so big it took up half the living room. When it was done, Lucas stood back, hands on hips, and said, "This one's ours." "Yeah, buddy," I said, "this one's ours." Later, when he was asleep, I hung my uniform back in the closet. I realized I didn't need to wear it anymore, not for this fight. It had done its job. It reminded me who I was when the ground under me shifted. The war I fought overseas was about survival. This one was about something bigger, a future worth surviving for. And I'd fight it again every day, if it meant my son would grow up knowing his father never surrendered.